Sarah, welcome back to Beyond the Title for this special edition celebrating the role of women in entertainment. By way of an introduction, who were your heroines growing up and how do you think they left a mark on you?
Well, hi, Josh. And can I say it's a pleasure to be back talking with you. And I'm very honoured to be a part of this celebration of women in television and broadcasting. And looking back to the people who I enjoyed watching and wanted to be, who were on television when I was a child, that would probably be most likely the actresses that I enjoyed watching. I probably watched more drama as a kid growing up. And because at that stage, I wanted to be, well, I still want to be, I wanted to be an actress. I'm thinking back to the people who I was sort of a bit crazy about, and it would definitely have been Diana Rigg, who is Dame Diana Rigg, who passed, I think, either last year or the year before, very sadly. But when I was a child, she played an iconic, and I don't use that word lightly, role in an amazing series called The Avengers. And she was Emma Peel, who was clad top to toe in black leather and kicked the bejeebers out of various criminals and was the sidekick, pardon the pun, to the lead male, John Steed, his name was, played by a wonderful actor called Patrick Macnee. But Dame Diana Rigg went on to be a scion of other programs. She was James Bond's one and only wife, but where she shone was on stage in the theatre. And I thought she was absolutely terrific, but she was one of many of my heroines. Another was a wonderful actress called Angela Down, who was one of the leading characters in a drama series about the Pankhursts and about Emmeline Pankhurst primarily, played by Sian Lloyd. And Angela Down played Sylvia Pankhurst, one of Emmeline's daughters, who was, well, I think what we call now a freedom fighter. She fought for the vote. She was a suffragette, but she also fought for the rights of the working classes then. She fought for the rights to vote for men, because people kind of forget that the male vote across the board, true universal enfranchisement, wasn't then the norm, and she fought for that. And so Sylvia Pankhurst was a heroine, but so was Angela Down, the actress who played her. She embodied her for me. And I suppose if I was to choose a third heroine for me in television and in life, it would be my mother. My mother was a remarkable actress. She was a remarkable woman. And she fought for the rights of people throughout her life as well. So I think I can see a kind of pattern there.
So far in the series, we've spoken to some icons of British drama who have carved out a career by portraying other people. But for you, you've become a familiar face in our living rooms for over 40 years. And in your opinion, how can television create an intimacy between broadcasters and the public in a way that other mediums can't?
Well, I'm going to start off by disagreeing with you in some ways about the premise of television creating a more intimate relationship with the audience than others, because I would say that radio can create possibly the most intimate relationship with its audience, that it is at its best truly a one-to-one experience, an immediate one-to-one experience. And essentially, of course, that more of radio is live than television. And I think that if you can get that same intimacy on television, it's mind-blowing, but it's very rare. I've always felt that as a broadcaster and as a listener, as a consumer of broadcasting, listening to the radio is such a different experience than viewing television. I've always thought that the radio broadcaster has a much harder job on their hands. There are no props, there are no visual cues, there's no little silence where you can fill it with a cheeky little look to camera. It is just you and the microphone, or better expressed, probably you as a broadcaster and that person most likely sitting on their own at home or at work or on the bus, on the tube, in the car, just you and that person. And that is the true masters and mistresses of that craft know how to speak to one person at a time. They know how to create that intimacy. And that's why I think some of the best people on television have come from radio or also work in radio. Because if you can get that feeling that you are not addressing a theatre full of people, a stadium full of people, and really keep it one-to-one, I think that helps to create that intimacy. And that is the secret of being a good broadcaster. And there were two people who taught me about that in the past. And one of them would definitely go into my heroines of television, though I didn't get to know her until I was not a child anymore. And that was Biddy Baxter, the erstwhile editor of Blue Peter. And I would say, although she didn't create the show, the idea, she created it in its most used format, really, in its most successful format. And she did a thing which doesn't happen very often now, I don't think, where she accepted the fact that, especially if you'd come from theatre and from an acting background, as I had, you needed some help to transfer the skills of one across to the other, in that you are just talking to one child or one person at a time when you're working on live television on that program. And always to remember that as you look into that lens, imagine the face of the person that you want to be having that conversation with. Now, I'm lucky because I can see you, Josh, so I don't have to imagine you there. You're there. But if we were in a studio and I was wanting to address something particularly that I felt would excite you, that would interest you, I would imagine your face down that lens. And that's what I teach people now. Really work on that one-to-one idea. And that's where television creates the intimacy, I think, at its best.
Yeah. Of course, you were following in a long line of legends, including Jasmine Bligh, Valerie Singleton, Esther Rantzen, and Gloria Hunniford, who were much more political symbols of modernity. They were significant broadcasters in their own right. Looking back at the contributions of these pioneers of broadcasting, how do you think they paved the way for your generation of presenters?
Well, quite a few of those names are obviously still very much broadcasting. So they not all of them, but they still are. And yes, I suppose they did plough a certain furrow. I think Gloria was someone who really did, especially because she encompassed that extraordinary breadth of broadcasting, in that she is a consummate radio broadcaster, as well as, I think, being a fabulous television presenter. And that when she had her own show, interviewing celebrities mainly, she absolutely got that incredible intimacy. And I would certainly look to Gloria as being someone who I watched and enjoyed, and probably at the time I was watching, I didn't appreciate quite the brilliance of her craft, actually. And it's only when you start doing it yourself and you realize how easy people make it look. And of course, those are the brilliant people, the people who make something look like it's just what they do. It's as easy as breathing in and out. And there's no edge. There's no, what she was very clever at doing, and what she is very clever at doing, is she can get a point across, get an answer to a tricky question with no sense of combat in her voice, in her being. There's certainly edge to what Gloria does, but it's not edgy, if you see the difference. And I would always aim for that as well. I think you get far more out of people when you have a calmer, gentler approach than the more aggressive, combative, perhaps, I was going to say journalistic, but of course, really good journalists, they are journalists like Gloria, but it doesn't have to be shouty. It doesn't have to be aggressive. And I would say that Gloria certainly paved that particular path very well indeed.
Josh said it's the same when you watch her on Loose Women. Now it's a light show, but she's still got that journalistic ability to have that edge, I suppose.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That she has got, she's not trying to prove her own point. She's trying to ask the questions that you want to ask, but in a very elegant and a very respectful way, actually. And that again is very clever, because the person who is being asked the questions, or those of us who are listening to the point she's making, she's giving she's treating us as though we are as intelligent as she is, without any condescension, without any patronizing or any condescension. She's treating us as though we are as intelligent as she is.
Why do you think children's television has always required the use of male and female presenting combinations?
Well, it hasn't, actually. I mean, there haven't always been male and female, but are you talking about specifically programs like Blue Peter or the erstwhile Saturday morning shows? Yeah. I think because the BBC from its earliest days regarded itself, as far as children's programs were concerned, as in loco parentis, that they, for that while that the children were sitting in front of the television set in the sitting room, that the BBCs were sort of their guardians, if you like, and as such felt that the very conventional, traditional role of a mother and father would be, or maybe a big brother or a big sister would be appropriate. And I think it was, again, something that was never questioned right the way through. And I remember questioning this when I was on Saturday mornings, and Philip was going to go off and do Joseph on stage and wouldn't be able to be around for complete shows sometimes, and sometimes not for the show at all. And they were asking me who I felt would make a good partner for the show. And I suggested a couple of names. And then amongst the names, it's probably just about half a dozen names, and at least half of those were other women. And there was a sort of double take. And I said, well, why not? Why not? And they said, no, you're right. And it was considered. It didn't actually happen, but it was considered. No, I'm wrong. It did happen on one show when Emma Forbes and I co-hosted, because I thought it would be, I was longing to get her more involved in the program. And if you cast your minds back, she actually, when Phil and I finished doing Going Live, she was the co-host of Live and Kicking. It was a lovely program to do. And it made not a jot of difference. Of course it didn't. And so I think I see myself as creating a slight, upsetting the apple cart there in a good way, I think, and showing that things could be done. But if I just take you back a few years before then, I mean, I remember having a remarkable conversation, remarkable in its kind of, oh my goodness, unreconstructed, not misogyny exactly, but just being so blinkered. I remember having a chat with a guy who'd worked on Blue Peter and Saturday Mornings. He'd been a director on Blue Peter, one of the producers, and then he'd migrated across to Saturday Mornings. And he was brilliant. He was great fun to work with. He was inspired in the way he directed in the studios. He was funny. He wrote very funny scripts when he got the chance to. But I remember him talking about he was then going to work on, was it ITV or Nickelodeon? I can't remember. And I was in the building where he was working, having a meeting about something entirely different. And him saying, oh, we're trying to cast one of the Nickelodeon shows. And we've got the girl, but we haven't got the guy. And I said, well, do you have to have another guy? I mean, she could do it by herself, or you could have anyone, what? He said, no, we've got to have a guy. And I said, and what about him or him? They said, no, they're all younger than she is. I said, yeah, and? He said, yeah, no, there's always got to be a gradient. I said, what on earth do you mean? He said, with a male and female partnership on television, there's got to be a gradient. He's got to be older, taller, more experienced. I said, you are absolutely nuts. You are completely nuts. I don't know what planet you're from. I don't know what era you're from, but that is absolutely, and we parted on good terms, but I just had to say, so that wasn't, I'm trying to remember, that would probably be around the late 90s, early 2000s. So yes, a generation ago, but in terms of time and history, the blink of an eye ago. So things have changed radically since then. Thank goodness. Thank God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Josh, it's interesting you say that, because when you look back at those shows of that time, the big shows, it was always a older man with a younger woman.
Yes, always. And now you think about what happened to more recently with shows like Strictly Come Dancing.
Yeah.
You've got your archetypal, lifelong, super well-known host of Bruce Forsyth. and Tess Daly as his
Mm,
young, you know, his beautiful
mm.
female assistant, and then Claudia doing the take two, and now it's all change. And it was almost, I don't know, if there's been a real sea change, and it's been a very good one, very good one.
Mm. Britain also boasts a legacy of pioneering females behind the camera. In your opinion, how important were figures like Biddy Baxter, Rosemary Gill, and Yvonne Littlewood in establishing a more collaborative, equality approach to programme making?
This is an interesting question, because in broadcasting and in television, right back from the very beginning, I mean, Josh, you mentioned Jasmine Bligh, and there were a plethora of women involved in at a fairly executive level. There's still a glass ceiling there even now. I don't think we've ever had a female director general yet. I think the person who was probably most likely to have got that job within the last 20 years would have been Monica Sims. And I think she retired before she became, you'll have to check this out, and I should have done my homework on this one, but anyway, I think Monica Sim would have been the most likely to get that role. But in terms of being hands-on in the studio, in the gallery, on the studio floor, there have been some remarkable women, and are remarkable women involved. I think Biddy, again, certainly would have ploughed a furrow there. Though if you spoke with her about this, I'm trying to channel her as we speak now. She would say, darling, it would make no difference if I was a man or a woman. You simply have to be good at the job, and you have to know what you're doing. She'd say, there are crap women working in television, there are brilliant women working in television. There are crap men working in television, and there are brilliant men working in television. She wouldn't say that it had anything to do with gender. And I'm inclined to agree with her. However, I think that there was a tremendously old boy network operating at the BBC and within broadcasting. I mean, go back some years and you would never be taken on to certain BBC training schemes if you weren't, well, you certainly had to have a degree. And going back, you know, far enough, it would have to be Oxbridge, and you'd have to be a bloke. If you were a woman, you would be working your way up from a more lowly level, probably, usually. Again, that has changed significantly. But I think people like, I mean, I worked with, you mentioned, who were the other women that you worked with? You mentioned there. You mentioned Yvonne Littlewood. I mean, she was remarkable because, of course, there were always, the BBC was always divided into very strict departments. So you had children's department, you had light entertainment, you had science features, news, documentaries, all very carefully, these little, or rather big boxes, you know, that people could be put into. And again, you know, women would always be considered to work in children's programs. Now you'd say, well, why would a young woman who might have been an only child be working her way furiously round the clock trying to get on in television? Why would she be any better working in the children's department than she would in news and current affairs or science features? The answer is she wouldn't, but it was just the way things were seen. You know, that's not to say that working in the children's department, talk to Biddy again, isn't the best job in the world. For her, it was, and it is. But if you wanted to migrate across to other departments, it would have been more difficult. But it's interesting, really, now that how much that has changed, and again, you know, as time goes on, you've got to hope that that will continue.
Yeah.
Please re-ask me the question if I haven't answered it fully
Oh,
for
no,
you.
yeah, that's perfect.
They're big. You're throwing those great big epic subjects at me, and sometimes my brain will get carried away going down a rabbit hole. Do you know what I mean, John? You know what I'm like? I disappear down a rabbit hole.
Josh said he only does it because he knows that you're able to answer them. So
yeah, that old chestnut.
So I was born in 1987, so I don't remember the 80s firsthand, but researching the period, it occurs to me that this was the first era which introduced the idea of interactivity with the audience. How conscious were you of nurturing this concept on one of BBC's most popular live programmes, Going Live? As a female broadcaster of this era, did you feel a responsibility to project the perfect image?
Let's start with the last one, because you've got about 4 questions in there.
Yeah.
So no, I was never conscious of wanting to project. I don't know what a perfect image is. That's the first thing. And I feel very strongly about that. I do not know what a perfect image is. And the 80s were a period where you had the beginnings of so many important movements starting. Tech was changing by the minute. What we were able to do in a technological way, both in a studio and in our lives and domestically. Phones were updated themselves every week, which was why it was extraordinary that at Going Live we got those big giant phones that we used to speak to people on, because that was the accepted thing for most people. But that was obviously, right on the cusp of changing completely. Now, in amongst all the questions in that particular big question, the first one was, how aware were we of fostering that interactivity? All right, I know where I want you to go back to. While you were giving me that question, I was thinking about, hang on a minute, I remember how interactivity started in broadcasting and on television. And it was by snail mail, and it was by sending things in. Yeah. And one of my favorite programs was a show called Vision On. And it was aimed at everybody, as any good program should be. Anybody and everybody who wanted to tune in. And it was the first program I remember where I would see somebody signing in the corner of the picture, because it was called Vision On. It was there for children who were challenged orally, and it was the first time that there'd been a program of that nature. And wonderful Tony Hart was one of the presenters, and it was based around art, and it would teach you how to draw, teach you how to make pictures. It would teach you all manner of extraordinary skills without it feeling like you were being taught. Significantly, it was the first place that any of us were introduced to Morph, a little plasticine. He started off on Vision On. And of course, we all know what happened with the Morph creators. They took on a young man called Nick Parks, who became the creator of Wallace and Gromit and all those other now Oscar-winning. It all started with this amazing program called Vision On. And every week I would do a picture to send in and hope that it got onto their special gallery, because during that show, the pictures that had come in that week, they would put up on the wall, and they just have music playing, which was obviously great for those of us who were able to hear it. And for people who weren't able to hear it, they would just see all the pictures that had been sent in, and every week I'd watch to see if my picture got featured. And that for me was my very first taste of interactivity with the television, and it was thrilling. So we were kind of building on that tradition, and that began in the 1960s. So by the time you get to 87, you've got instantaneous phone calls going back out, which I suppose, you know, the biggest proponent of that before then had been Multicolour Swap Shop. And hearing somebody's voice, you know, from home watching at the same time as the show was on air. And we were able to do that, taking it a couple of steps further forward. We probably had more technical facilities available to us, but we just felt that that was natural. That was what we should be doing. That's what worked with the program format and what would work for our audience. I don't think any of us, I mean, when you're living through something and you're working hard and you're just living within that moment, you're not really thinking about legacy. You're not thinking about, oh, we are changing something here. We are doing this. You're just doing it. These are the things that you really only realize in retrospect. When you look back, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Going back to your point about, and I can see how you joined those up, really, that there we were reacting to things immediately on air as they were happening, to the phone calls that came in, to the questions that came in, to the incidents that happened because it was live. All of those things. Did one feel that you had to sort of project somehow, be very careful about the image you were projecting? And I'll go back and I'll reiterate, no, I didn't. And there were other things that were creeping in that were changing perceptions of all sorts of things. Projections of the way people were perceived on television. And that was coming from the music industry, particularly. You had got suddenly these amazing stars coming onto the show who were pushing back boundaries. And perhaps in former times, that would have happened on a show that was primarily aimed at kids. So, you know, we would have the fashions during that time helped a lot because they were very androgynous. You know, we all had shoulders out here. I had like shaved hair up the side there and there, big mullety hair. So did the boys. Boy George and Alison Moyet came on the show and they were like two peas in a pod. It was wonderful. So you were breaking down all sorts of barriers there. So there was no longer the need to even feel that you had to project a perfect image. You know, it was like the playing cards were all being thrown up in the air, and it was up to you to do with them when they came down what you wanted to do, really. I'm not saying that prejudice disappeared, my goodness, no, or even began to disappear. I'm not saying that people who felt maybe then gender fluid suddenly realized, oh my God, that's me, I'm gender fluid. All I'm saying is that there was a chink of a door pushed open, you know, just a little bit of light coming through. And I think it all started then.
Leads on very nicely to the next question, actually. Going Live was able to capture the ever-changing fashions and fads of the 1980s pop culture in a very youth-orientated way. In what ways did the BBC use this as a barometer for identifying the wants and needs of the youth demographic?
That's really interesting. And the best people to ask would be the people who were involved in focus groups. I don't know if they still happen now. I don't know if it's necessary, because you can watch much more instantly what's happening in terms of demographic watching a program, as it with iPlayer and sounds, you know, all that data is much easier to capture. In those days, it was much more relying on focus groups, on correspondence, on one of the things they used to do. They had an annual awards show, which became Comic Relief Awards, funnily enough, that slot. But up until then, it had been called many different things. You had the Multicolour Swap Shop Awards, but it was an awards show for children to vote for their favourite female presenter, male presenter, show, drama, sports personality, that kind of thing. Do you remember? And so, I mean, I think that they used that, the people who won those awards, that got the kids' votes, they used that as a barometer to see whether they were going down the right path, really, and to look at the kind of thing that they were offering, the platforms that they were giving to certain types of programs, certain types of drama, bands who appeared on the channel. Yeah, I think it was a useful place to put that litmus paper in, really.
And yeah.
Josh said he remembers they used to show you how to make a replica award out of plastic bottles and stuff like that, and he remembers trying to make one when he was a kid.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that. I mean, I got my first award, and it was the Multicolored Swap Shop Awards, and it had that sort of rainbow shape on it. I've still got it, actually, somewhere or other. I have still got it. And then it changed into something called the SOS Awards, and that wouldn't have been quite so much fun to make. But I don't remember ever making one. But yeah, it's yes. So you know, that's sort of feeding on itself, isn't it? Making that item popular so that kids get even more invested in it.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Unbeknownst to you, by being an ever-present female on Saturday mornings, you were subconsciously paving the way for the next generation of talented female broadcasters who were about to explode onto our TV screens. Looking at the success of performers like Gabby Roslin, Davina McCall, Ulrika Johnson, Tess Daly and Claudia Winkleman, how do you think you were instrumental in establishing the footprint for this kind of TV star?
Well, I don't know is the short answer. I mean, I wasn't aware of establishing any sort of footprint, but I worked with Davina on possibly her first, if not one of her first ever shows. We did a live 2-hour daily show on Sky called Sky 1 to 3. Get it? 1, 2, 3. That went out after the morning live shows and before the afternoon live shows. We were across lunchtime. It was a great slot, and it was the brainchild of a terrific man called David Elstein, who'd worked with ITV at Thames and had come up with all sorts of brilliant live programming for them. And he wanted to commission. He got made head of commissioning at Sky back in the 90s, and this was when Sky was commissioning its own programming that wasn't news before it was buying in. It was only one channel then, I think, or maybe it was Sky Sports and Sky One, and so Paul Ross and I co-hosted. And it was a very short-lived program because within 6 months, Sky had decided that it no longer wanted to make its own programs, full stop. That all came to an end, and it was just going to concentrate on football and sport at that time. it hadn't divided up into all the different iterations of Sky, with Sky Atlantic, Sky Art, Sky, you know, that was come along a lot later. But this was a wonderful proving ground for those few months, because the people that were on television for the first time included Davina McCall, who was wonderful, great fun, and a young chef who'd never been on television before, but had been found by our producers on that show, called James Martin. And he was, I know this isn't relating to the question you're asking about women on television, but he was quite nervous. It was his first time cooking live on television. And we had an oven behind on the set. And he was so nervous. I'd got my hand up ready to open the door for him. And he actually trapped my hand in the oven door live on television. There's training, not what came out of my mouth, I can tell you. And I still have a scar on my thumb just about here. Thanks, James. That's all because of you. Yeah, yeah. But I think I as I say, I wasn't aware of sort of creating a footprint for anyone else to go into. But if I did, I'm really glad about that. I mean, I was lucky enough to work with so many fun and fabulous women in television. I did 2 series of a show called Posh Frocks and New Trousers, which was the successor to a show called Frocks on the Box, which was presented by Muriel Gray and Mary Helvin, the model Mary Helvin. And when that came to an end, the same producer wanted to again have 2 females at the helm and have male presenters also working on the show, but not as the main presenters on it. And so the producer of that show, a lady called Vicky Barris, asked me who I would like to co-host with. And I said, I think the person who would be ideal for this would be Annabelle Giles, because she is incredibly sharp. She is so witty, so funny. She says it how it is. And she just happened to have been, again, as she would have told you, were she here, that it was more by accident than by design. She was a top model. And so she knew the fashion industry inside and out, but she also knew life inside and out. And so I was very lucky to have co-hosted that with Annabelle. And I would say that it was more, that was a kind of footprinty thing, really, that you've got, again, 2 women hosting a show. And do you know who our male assistant was? Any guesses who it might be? If I tell you that he is at the top of his game now in news, Krishnan Gurumurthy. He was our handsome young assistant. And so we sort of turned the tables on that. Yeah. And it was it was fun. And the other thing I'd just like to drop in here, you know, when you're about to start a new show, often you'll be working with someone who you've not worked with before, but they might be very well-known people, and they might be women. The number of times I have had people say to me, and I hope you're right, Sarah, but you'll be working with so-and-so. She can be a bit tricky, you know, she can be a bit tricky. So just be warned. And I'll go and do the job and we'll work together. And that person will be absolutely the least tricky person in the world. They will be fun and fabulous to work with. They will be, above all, professional, hard workers, and sticklers for things being right. And it's really weird that when a woman is like that, she is tricky. When a man is like that, he's a thorough, sound professional. And that still can sometimes happen, I have to say. And you know, hopefully that way of thinking is going. But yeah, no, if I've done anything to push open some doors for anyone, male or female, then I'm very happy to have done that.
Mm.
We, I,
Just said we actually had Krishnan on the podcast. He was
Yeah,
probably one of the first ones we did actually. A few 6-7 years ago, something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And he was terrific, and he
Yeah.
is terrific.
yeah.
See, he learned from the mistresses, didn't he?
Yeah. Following on from that, last year we were lucky enough to welcome the great Zoe Ball onto the podcast, where she said that growing up, all she wanted to be was you.
Oh, I thought that's so
When
lovely.
you look back on that Blue Peter and Going Live tenure, how easy is it to see small shoots of what became the evolution of the female TV presenter?
I'd go back and I'd look at the people who were on it before me, really. You know, there were always female TV presenters, always on television. I mean, and the right from the beginning, the first face to be broadcast from Alexandra Palace was the face of a woman. And I don't know whether that was just an accident or it was on purpose, because I don't know. That's, but I think that in terms of being able to behave as one would in a completely natural way, I think probably I can speak on that a little bit, because I had come out of theatre and I was very unused to, and I think we spoke about this, Josh, last time I was on. It was something of a challenge for me to not have a role to play, to be trying to play myself.
Yeah.
And the day that really all fell into place for me was the day that we were doing an item on Blue Peter about juggling. And I may have told you this anecdote, and if I did, then please forgive me for repeating myself. But I only repeat it because it was for some reason everything fell into place that day. I guess I was enjoying the juggling item, and I was trying to juggle, and we had these, I think there were 6, the Flying Karamazov brothers, who were all from California, who were all dressed as Russian jugglers. And they were absolutely crazy. And it was all about improvisation. And it was all about doing what you could, doing your best. We were leaping all over the studio. And suddenly I felt like I was me. And suddenly I felt like I could be completely me. And I didn't have to adhere to any script particularly. Yes, there was a format, but it felt a lot freer. And I don't think I'd seen a lot of that on television up to then. I think particularly on something like Blue Peter, which was so had to be carefully timed because we were leading up to the news. I think that there suddenly felt a kind of shedding of something that had been weighing down on me, of rules and regulations. There was a slight shedding of that. And it was probably because I was comfortable with my surroundings at last. I felt at home doing what I was doing, so that by the time it got to doing Saturday mornings, that then was the zenith of that feeling, that I was much more a part of creating a program. And there really was no script, and the timings were down to us to get right. And so, yeah, I think there you did see the shoots of something different about to happen. Yeah.
Last time we didn't manage to touch upon your work outside of TV Centre, and one show which I think we should mention is Pebble Mill. In 2024, it sounds ridiculous to have an all-star chat show on at lunchtime, but it was extraordinary how many big names you featured. Looking at those interviews as a whole, what do you think they tell us about Britain's relationship with popular culture in the 80s and 90s?
Yes, I think that was a very extraordinary time in terms of the fact that you would have on internationally known names. I mean, I got so lucky with some of the people I interviewed while I was doing Pebble Mill. I mean, you see, some of those were live. We did some live and we did some recording just so that we could get them out across the week, every day of the week. That was the only way it could be done, because they needed that space at Pebble Mill Studios for other shows. And so the pre-recorded ones would be done in the evening. So it very much felt, I could feel when they were in it had that sort of evening show feel about it, even though it was going out at lunchtime. And I think lots of things have happened to have changed just simply the availability of big stars, in that there are now multitudes of programs, channels that they can appear on, and that they can appear from their own homes. Because of course, when you're looking back to the mid-90s on that Pebble Mill show, not many of us had our own computers at home. In fact, it would be really rare to have a computer for most people at home. Certainly nothing like a laptop. And now the way to appear on any sort of screen is completely portable. You know, all those stars can have it with them, and they can zoom it in like we're doing now, you know. And I think that's just a reflection of the technology. And I also wonder whether that has led the way in changing some of the way in which we feel about talking to people who are known for being, for example, movie stars, that there isn't perhaps the same reverence, which is a shame in some ways, but in other ways, it's perhaps more relaxing for that movie star as well. That there's been a more, people are less godlike, and people are less revered. That's the nice way of putting it. In other ways, maybe there's less respect, which is a shame, because those people, the really good ones, deserve just as much respect. But it's become a more daily occurrence. It's not so special. And I think you could extrapolate that thought right through television, in that there are fewer and fewer programs on air that we would consider to be event television. Yes, there are the big football matches, there are the big events, the big royal occasions, there are the big coming togethers of people to celebrate. But the actual, I'm trying to think what would be the most recent, what they call in America, you know, water cooler program, where people stand around the water cooler the next day and discuss a program they've watched. And they still do occur. They still occur. I'd say that Traitors is one of them. I'd say that when it's going well, I'm a Celebrity can be one of them. Strictly, you know, the big Saturday evening, Sunday evening, OT shows, you know, the ones where you have to vote. But they are fewer and further between. And I don't know, actually, whether, I'm thinking about it now, whether having movie stars on programs is quite as usual, as it is quite as normal for those Saturday nights as it used to be. I'm not sure, because they can phone in to shows like live morning shows. They can become part of that without having to leave their homes. So I think in many ways, again, technology has led the way on that, but the effect of it has been, well, we saw, I don't know, we saw Bradley Cooper talking from his ranch. You know, we saw him at home in his home surroundings. Is that as special as seeing him all dressed up to the nines, coming down a staircase with a band playing as he enters the studio and sitting next to Michael Parkinson? I don't know. I don't know. It's I don't know whether there's still a place for that, but I think it does build up the moment and make it slightly more special.
where he was Roman now from the ground
Josh said he remembers going to a lecture with Michael Parkinson where he was asked why the straight chat show format isn't around anymore. And he said it's because people don't want that anymore. They want a party. And that's why the Graham Norton show works so well, because they get to go on there and sort of a bit more party atmosphere.
Well, you that's from the horse's mouth, from the great man's mouth, and he could be right there. I think it's just a different flavor of show, and it's also, with due respect to both Graham Norton and to Michael Parkinson, it's more a reflection of their personalities. That Parky was somebody who very much knew how to handle three guests sitting side by side, but his real excellence was that intimacy and drawing stuff out of and allowing his guests to speak. Whereas Graham Norton's style is not that. His style is, and he is both geniuses, and I don't use those words lightly, I really don't. But Graham Norton makes it look so easy to handle four massively huge stars sitting side by side on a sofa, and dare I say it, some of them might have egos the size of Mount Everest, and he just knows how to handle that situation. And I think that is not about necessarily what the audience is craving. It's about the best that those two hosts could give, excelling within their particular style of performance. And Graham Norton has been an actor, stand-up, extrovert. Michael Parkinson, actually none of those things, certainly not an extrovert. He's what I would call much more old school, where broadcasting was about a presenter drawing somebody else out. It was about a presenter pulling back a curtain and showing the person watching, showing the audience something else other than them. It wasn't about them. And Graham Norton comes from a different generation where it could be about him as well. But where he's clever is he still makes it about the people that are on the sofa beside him. And I do think he is matchless in that. I really do.
Another thing that we didn't talk about last time was that in 1995, you teamed up with your late husband, the iconic Mike Smith, for the ITV series The Exchange. Following along the same lines as BBC's multicoloured swap shop, why do you think this isn't as fondly remembered as perhaps it should be? Was it expensive to make?
When you say fondly remembered, do you mean it didn't, because it was received very well at the time?
Yeah.
It didn't get a second or third series. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I remember really good, but
Just so you remember watching it, thinking it was really good, but then it just disappeared.
Yeah, that was lots of different reasons. Mainly, it was to do with the reorganization of ITV. I don't know if you remember, but at that time, the regions were being changed.
Yeah.
So you used to have Thames in the London area, Carlton, well, actually ATV, then Central, then Carlton in the Midlands. That was quite a complicated negotiation going on there at the shareholder levels, all of that. And you had Anglia Television, you had Granada, the great Granada Television, and they all contributed to the network. And the most tricky one that the negotiation was going on was Carlton, and that was what happened. We were broadcasting that through Carlton Television, and it was Carlton that stopped. And when you have new people coming in at the top of a new company, they want to have a new broom, which I understand, and they want to bring in whole new schedules, new ideas, and I seem to remember that particular slot that we had for the exchange, that slot actually went. It became a crossover area of other things, and I think a movie would have gone on in its place. Now, again, I would have to go back and look, but I know that it was tricky. Was it expensive? I don't know that it would have been any more expensive than some of the other big Saturday afternoon shows, but it might have been too expensive for what Carlton was going through at that time. That's certainly a thought there. But it was a fun show to do. I mean, I think had we done a second series, there were certain things that we certainly would have changed on it. And certain format things, because it's very rare that you have a brand new series. I mean, you rightly compared it to Swap Shop. It was sort of like having everybody in there. It was a cross between the Antiques Roadshow, Swap Shop. I mean, there are quite a few shows that are like that now, if you think about it. There was a touch of Repair Shop on there. It kind of gave birth to a few ideas as well. Because we had the great Ronnie Bock working on it, telling people how you could improve, the exact provenance of something that they brought into the studio, and then how you could repair it. And he could have done that for them. So yeah, it was a fun idea to do. And I think it was quite unwieldy. It was quite a big show. And I think we would have probably made it slightly more intimate and made it slightly less. It was very ambitious in its size at the time, but as I say, it was fun to do. But I worked on quite a few things with Mike, and that was just one of them. But of course, the irony is, when you're working on something with someone, you never get to actually see them, because they're always the other side of the studio. Or when we did Hospital Watch together, for example, we were at other ends of the building normally. And even on Ghost Watch, well, then obviously we were in different locations, but a month apart from each other, because everything that he did on Ghost Watch with Michael Parkinson, small world, was all shot a month after all the stuff that we shot in the house. And it was all cut together for that live program. But it was just ironic, really. We didn't often ever sit side by side on a live program together, but we were both hosting the same show very often.
And you and Mike also created your own company, Flying TV. What was your inspiration behind that, and how does that help you have more control over the content you create?
Okay. So what was the inspiration? I have letters that Mike's sister found in their mum's attic that she gave to me after Mike had passed away, that he wrote to the BBC when he was 8, 9, and 10. he wrote them to Blue Peter because he'd set up his own autocross championship in the fields near where they lived. His father worked for Ford Motor Company, and Mike could build engines when he was about 8. I say this for several reasons, because it brings together so many different passions of his. Technical, cars, television. And then the next letters that he wrote to the BBC, when he lied about his age, when he was 16, and said that he was 17 and that he would like to go and do the camera operating course, because he was passionate about cameras and about filming, which indeed he always was. So spool forward several decades, not several, but a few decades. And as soon as he felt he had the wherewithal to learn how to fly, he learned how to fly. And that was primarily to get to, because at that stage he was racing in the British Touring Car Championship. And in those days, the British Touring Car Championship, which is still going on now, but in those days it was broadcast on BBC One, on Grandstand, and it got higher ratings than Formula One. It was huge. And he and his teammate were finding it very hard to get into the circuits in the morning to get to the races because it was packed. So they each worked out that if between them they learned how to fly and they bought a small helicopter, they could fly in and out without having to sit in the queues all night. Anyway, so that's what they did. So this was Mike's flying passion, tick. But there was still this thing about the camera work. So a few years later, that would have been in about sort of the late 80s, early 90s. A few years later, Mike and I were on our holidays and we were in America and we were sitting in a bar, and on television over the right up in the corner was live news going on, and everyone was glued to it. And so were we. And Mike said, can you see what's happening on that screen? And I said, yeah. I said, there's a live car chase we're watching. He said, yeah, but what's actually happening on that screen? I said, well, O.J. Simpson is being chased by the police through Los Angeles. And he said, yes, I know that. But what's actually happening? I said, oh, good, I've just told you. He said, no. I said, well, I think you better tell me. He said, you're seeing a helicopter filming that car chase. It's going out live. So that helicopter is being used to actually broadcast that live picture. It's being used like a satellite, it's being used, and I can't remember the expression used now, but it's its own RT setup. It's its own outside broadcast. It's its own link. And I said, yeah, that's great, Mike. Thanks very much. Yeah, I know you know all about that stuff. He said, no, we can't do that in the UK yet. We aren't able to do that. And I heard this giant clunk go in his head. I thought, I know where he's going next with this. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set that. I've worked in OBs all my life, outside broadcast all my life. I know enough people to set up all the links. We can work on this. And he got back and he worked with a company called Vislink to help set up so that he would be able to transmit from the helicopter live pictures. Not only that, it would be not a twin engine helicopter, it would be a single engine helicopter, which would be a fraction of the price to do it from, because everything had got lighter, smaller, more mobile, more portable. And it would make it affordable for more companies to be able to use aerial shots. Bear in mind, this is pre-drone, okay? So he got back and he was onto it. This became his driving passion. It was his baby. I was always involved and I knew what was going on, and we would, we'd have board meetings driving along in the car or sitting in bed at home or having a cup of tea, but it was always his passion because it brought together flying, broadcasting, And the very first thing that he did for BBC News was he was operating the camera, the system. He did so much research on the right system to use, and he bought ENG, electronic news gathering helicopter, had it made in California, this little helicopter where, I say little, 4 seats, which is what we still use, and all the camera and the monitors would be on the back 2 seats, and the camera operator would sit there. There'd be a free seat at the front for either presenter or a director, and the pilot in the front right seat. And the first time he used it live, it was to cover, there was a gold heist at Heathrow Airport in 2003, I think it was. And it was either 2003, 2004. And he reported on it as well as doing all the camera work. He did that. So there were all his passions in one go: live television, flying, camera work, watching what was happening live. And that's where Flying TV was born. And he was at its helm for 10 years. He passed away 10 years ago this year. I have to say, all his principles are still in place. And, you know, spiritually, I very much feel that he's still at the helm. But for the last 10 years, it's been run on a day-to-day basis by the wonderful Monica Wire. And I'm there flying the desk, making sure that we pay the people that we should pay and that we get paid by the people who should be paying us. And yeah, it's been 10 years that he's not been there on a day-to-day basis in the office. So yeah, it's a heck of a legacy, because he was the first person to do this with a single engine helicopter, and he worked with the Civil Aviation Authority on this. He worked with them to make everything more efficient, safer, more comfortable. I mean, just a quick thing. It's thanks to Mike that the mustering point for all helicopters going down the Thames, which is the main heli route through London, when they have to wait for the takeoffs to happen from London City Airport, it used to be right on top of the Globe Theatre, just south of the Thames. And it would drown out magnificent performances. It's thanks to him that that got moved to a different spot, so that actors could be heard and audiences could enjoy the performance. So, you know, in other ways too. And that's interesting, because theatre was another one of Mike's passions. So yeah, it's he leaves quite an important legacy with that, quite aside from his broadcasting, purely broadcasting legacy.
Last year, you made your long-awaited return to television for the BBC game show The Finish Line alongside Roman Kemp. What were the significant changes you noticed about the evolution of television since you were away?
Not one. Not one. And it was absolutely, oh my goodness, how much fun was making series 1 of The Finish Line. Only thing that has been more fun has been series 2, which we've just finished making, which will be going out very soon. And it was just lovely. And you know how things sort of come full circle very often, in that we were in the studio in Belfast, which is your archetypal BBC studio. It smells the same, it looks the same, not what's obviously on the set, which I like to think is one of the most extraordinary sets for a modern day game show that I've ever seen. I mean, talk about shiny floor, it's as shiny can be. But it was just the most delightful experience, is the most delightful experience, in that the studio in Belfast is run along very strict lines. It's more like the studios were run in the mainland of the UK, the BBC studios, back a bit. You know, I'm not saying they're not old-fashioned, They just run a very tight ship, and you know, you know what's where, and the crew. I tell you, the only thing that's changed is that the crews have more suites. The camera operators and everybody in charge of sound and all the techie stuff, they're down on the floor on this show. They're there in the floor, which is just lovely. And it means that every time I walk past a certain group of cameras there, I can just help myself to sweeties, because they're very good at keeping those stops. Yeah, yeah. No, I can't sing the praises highly enough of working at BBC Belfast. They go out of their way to make sure that things work properly, and that the guests are so looked after. And that is also down to the production companies that put this together, because it's this weird thing now where you can't divide up ITV and BBC and all it, because everyone's coming together. So The Finish Line is made by a co-production of two independent companies. One is Nice One, based in Belfast, and they make shows like Mastermind, and the other is Potato. And Potato make The Chase, they make The Cube, they make so many different shows. And Potato is an ITV production company, but they're making it for BBC One in a BBC studio. So everybody's working together on it. And I think that collaborative nature, perhaps that had already started a while back, but that's very healthy, I think. But underlying all that lovely crew and production team in the studio at BBC Belfast was it felt like old times, really.
Looking back at your TV tenure, how has the role of women on television reflected our social attitudes towards gender?
I think television reflects what's going on in the world. It should do. Very rarely does it take the lead. Sometimes it does, actually. Sometimes it does, over certain campaigns, particularly campaigns that are trying to improve people's lives. I think that Childline wouldn't have had the success it had without television. But when it comes to things like reflecting gender, perhaps in an almost osmosis way, you've got editors who will be take the lead in creating a certain lineup on a show or inviting certain guests, and without waving any placards around, without having great big signposts and neon signs, you will be seeing people as they are out there in life, in the street. And the more people who get to see how those people are just like them, then maybe things become more accepted and more quotidian, more everyday. And I think maybe television can help that. It can help that, both in documentary television, live television, and in drama as well. I'll add to that. So for example, if you are seeing, I mean, this is specifically, we're talking about this series of interviews, I know, is specifically about women in television. And so I guess if you are seeing a woman as the governor of a prison, for example, going right back to Prisoner Cell Block H, if you're seeing a woman as the owner and manager of a hotel in Crossroads, if you're seeing a female in charge of a large company, if you're seeing Helen Mirren in Prime Suspect, it suddenly seems more usual, even though the reason that there is something written about that they are the subject matter is because back then it was unusual. But the more and more, I suppose, drip, 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 it becomes more the norm and less questioned. So in that way, yeah, perhaps television has helped to balance the scales slightly.
Last question. What's next for Sarah Greene?
Okay, what's next for Sarah Greene? Well, Sarah Greene is hoping that Flying TV will go on flourishing. We're working on some very big projects at the moment. We are a service industry. We provide the aerial pictures for other productions. So your question earlier about does it mean we get to control what's on screen? Well, only in as much as we control the beautiful quality of the aerial footage that we offer people. But it's up to us just to keep moving with technology. Mike always said that you had to stay at least 2 steps ahead. And of course, technology is changing faster and faster and faster. So it becomes more of a challenge. But so far, we've done that. So I'd like that to continue. For me, as I say, I've just recorded a second series of The Finish Line. So that will be being broadcast, we think, probably either late April, early May. There's been no official announcement made on that yet, but that's what they're thinking about. And I'd like to see many more series of that because it's such fun to do.
Yeah.
It got a good reception. The figures were, they were quite surprised by how good the figures were for that slot in the afternoon. I'm doing now more contributive pieces to the One Show, actually. I've done some of those and there's some more of those coming up. And I have just put an idea that was dreamt up by a makeup artist on The Finish Line. Wonderful idea that she came up with, that she would like me to front and work on the idea with her. We've just put that in to have a pilot made of that idea, and that idea concerns itself with people's physical and mental wellness and the different techniques, treatments and therapies that are being offered currently, and which best to go for, and the whole discussion on how to stay safe, how not to get ripped off, but what might be worth looking at. So that's what we're working on at the moment. That's a few of the things that are next to Sarah Greene. Yeah.
Well,
Just said he's having an Indian head massage later, so he'll let you know how that goes.
Oh, right. Well, I might be contacting you then, Josh, because we might want to interview you about your Indian head massage and talking about the therapies that you have used.
Yeah.
That if I can nab you now, and say that if we get it to series, if you would consider being a guest, we would be delighted to have you.
Love it.
You're
his
on.
figure is absolutely huge, so you need a big budget.
You're hired. You're hired.
Right. Okay. Well, we will let you go.